Hello everybody, Pinstripe here. Welcome to Hedgerow Warfare. This is a single round between myself and Mr. Zarin, so shout out to Zarin, by the way. Awesome player, bearing in mind that going into this round, this is I think one of the first times he's playing on this map competitively, or just generally for the first time. I honestly don't know. I'm sure he can let us know in the comments, so don't judge him when he smashes himself into the ground, because I will be doing exactly the same thing, trying to take advantage of his early mistakes. But going into this scrim, for those of you that are not familiar with the esports term scrim, it is short for scrimmage, basically a practice, but as with every single practice in Hogs, I go into it with the most hardcore, try-hardy, sweaty mindset possible. Hence why, as you may have seen from the start of this video, the lineups, I technically have the stronger lineup, bringing the med going second and the two sappers. Meanwhile, Zarin is sticking with the para sapper scout and then two gunners, so somewhat defensive. But seeing as we have the full unedited gameplay, we have plenty of time to discuss absolutely everything, and as you can tell from the title of this video, I will be going with the ultra defensive medic strategy. Myself, as a competitive Hogs player, I would describe myself as being a defensive player. It is sort of my bread and butter. I much prefer being on the defensive, staying away from my opponent and making them come to me, rather than going on the offense and going crazy with them jetpacks. Which is always a good strat, but you kind of take the gamble. You put yourself in a much tougher position if you are the first person to make that move and push yourself closer to the enemy, which is why that mistake where I slammed into the ground, damaging myself and then taking the 100 HP from the 1,000-pound shell is just the perfect example of that, because it leaves me vulnerable, it leaves my paratrooper very, very injured and far away from my medic, and seeing as I'm going with the the ultra defensive strategy of having my medic in a vehicle, which we have seen previously on like Barnyard Blitz, basically the med in any kind of vehicle is sort of ultimately deemed defensive if it is a stationary vehicle. So if it is a pillbox or an artillery, then you are defensive, whereas if it were an aqua tank and a tank and you can move around, then technically you're an attacking battle medic. But sadly no tanks to be seen here, but there is poison which I can easily remove from the final health crate in the corner. And yeah, my scout, I wanted him to do scout things. The main role of scrims in competitive Hogs, or just in competitive play in general, whatever game you're playing, is to practice and try new things. And I guess you could look at my lineup as being somewhat conventional for this map. This was technically round 1 of our scrim. We did do full 5 rounds, and I do have 4 videos worth of footage to showcase, not including the round that I lost, because who needs to see that. But going forward, wherever I end up doing scrims, I will end up showing the maps that I lose, because it's important to analyze your defeats. But yeah, seeing as we have all of this time, I'm going to be focusing on my own strategies, what I was thinking as we go along, and Zarin can sort of, if he wants to, tell us what he was thinking in the comments. It's not really for me to judge what he's up to with any given turn, as I said, because of the fact that he hasn't really played on this map competitively, and it's not really fair for me to record and then judge somebody and be like, oh, he should have been looking at the minimap there. No, that's not for me to say. Every competitive player has their own thing, so let him do his own thing, But as with every map, my thought process is always to collect all the supplies possible. The more that you can take supplies away from your opponent, the better. But sadly, shrapnels weren't really on my side at all. And, well, they weren't really on anyone's side. I don't think anyone got anything higher than a 30 in this game. But the reason why I'm bringing the 2 sappers is fairly obvious. When there's artilleries on the field, you got to have at least 1 sapper. And like I said, seeing as this was the first round, you can technically afford to bring 2, as it's a best of 5. I think you have a maximum of 5 sappers that you can use from the pig pool, which comes in handy here because, like I say, I wanted to have 1 sapper that was primarily focused as sort of a secondary roaming sapper, and then another sapper to go ahead and his prime directive to be to deal with the artillery. But my first 2 turns with either sapper is just lame as hell, and really just goes completely against what it was I was trying to do, because when there's artilleries and you have more than one sapper, you should be taking out the artillery within those 2 turns. If you are not doing that, then that is a huge mistake, and that is exactly what I managed to achieve here. So, GG Pin, you suck at shrapnels. Especially when it's an artillery. Like, it's the biggest freaking thing that you can hit. I got a decent defensive position far enough away, but somehow, even while aiming for the side of it, I managed to throw this one over. Okay, it's the second one where but you see what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to throw the shrapnel so that it kind of lands to the side of the vehicle so that all of those shrapnel pieces, or at least a big chunk of them, can hit the artillery and deal that excess damage. But we get 22 from that first hit, which is just a big no-no. And if this were a full pro game, then that would be a huge mistake. And as we'll see again going forward, I do it again, and yeah, there's basically a lot of mistakes, but seeing as I haven't properly played competitively in a long time, I'm kind of giving myself a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to scrims. You know, you're kind of expected to make mistakes, you're allowed to make mistakes here, so it's kind of learning from them and taking that forward is always important. So yeah, anyway, getting back to the defensive medic, my prime directive in between turns is to collect any resource that is near me, whilst keeping in mind how much time I have. Because the last thing you want to do is remove yourself from your defensive position, i.e. your vehicle, go ahead and try and collect things and then end up running out of time and making that vehicle available to your opponent. It's really not what you want to do. And I know it is incredibly tempting when you have pigs around you or close to you and you are a medic to jump out and immediately tranquilize that guy. Like, it's very tempting, and yes, it is handy short term, but seriously, save your tranquilizers long term and just stockpile those weapons and keep that defensive armor available. Interestingly, a lot of pro players, or at least a chunk that I have seen, will tend to just ignore the vehicles entirely and just focus out everyone else until the other player has used up all the shells, and then just disregards the vehicle entirely, which is a viable strat, especially on this map, because the hedges are, well, they're just really defensive. It's very strong positions for the pigs that aren't in the artilleries, and it makes the shots a lot tougher for the pig that is in the artillery. So if you aren't so confident with your artillery shots, that's where things can get a little bit spicy, and I think that's where a lot of the negativity around this map comes from, is that, okay, the artilleries are there, but it's still a really hard shot for me to hit the pig that is X distance away. So I would just recommend, you know, jumping into a 2-player game by yourself, jumping into both artilleries and try and gauge the distance on certain shots, because despite the sort of velocity of the height data that we see, the steepness of those inclines, yeah, they offer defensive positions and they can absorb incoming shells, but you are still able to hit the majority of pigs, and when you have an artillery, you've got to use it as much as possible. Of course, my role, as I've mentioned with my sappers, is going fairly well, and it continues, maybe with a little bit of luck here, but I pride myself on decent TNT placement to get the job done, so my Roma is doing fairly well in pushing the pigs where they need to be, and he could have landed on the health crate, but thankfully just to the right as the extra health crate comes in, and we get the first kill of, well, second kill of the game, I should say. My paratrooper died earlier, but it is now 4v4, but you can see that Zarin's pigs are in a line. Poison gas players are just frothing at the mouth right now, wanting there to be some double hits, but sadly not going to happen at the moment. So with my medic sitting comfortable in the corner and the artillery sort of attracting all the attention that it needs to, I can sort of focus down the other enemies with the remaining pigs that I do have, in this case the scout. Because again, my prime directive with my other sapper at the moment is still on the artillery, which, as we will see from this next example, despite me getting closer to the target, and again looking to collect any resources available, because again, the more you can take away from your opponent the better, it still doesn't work out, which just flabbergasted me at the time, right? Let's watch this together, okay? So I get even closer. I aim directly to the right of the vehicle. I throw and it lands on the corner and deals 24 damage. What is this? I don't know. I was fuming at the time, but again, my sapper has failed to destroy the artillery, and it is going to take the third and final shrapnel of that pig in order to take it down eventually, which means that he is going to take even more damage here. He took the 24 from that shell earlier, make that 44 from the jetpack, and extra damage coming in now from the paratrooper. So with my scout roaming around, with my other roamer doing his thing, my main directive with the scout, of course, is going to be poison. I need to get those poisons in. Seeing as Zarin didn't bring a medic, I do have that advantage, and it has taken me a fair amount of time to make it work, really. But instead, I need to start hitting those shots with the artillery, which I do. Again, I also pride myself, alongside decent TNT placement, is decent artillery shell placement as well on this map. It takes me a little while, I think. It's sort of the first shot or two is kind of terrible, and then after that, you know, once I've got my gauge, my ranges in, it's pretty okay. So Zarin goes for the poison skip, which is fine, because it's 1 HP and my scout is nearby to jump on his head. No problemo, everything's okay. But my main thought in this turn is, okay, let's remove the skip, and then let's try and poison the paratrooper, whilst also ensuring that I'm not positioned too close to the artillery to make it an easy hit in the future. So I spin around and get the throw in, so that he is poisoned, which, taking it into the next few turns, will be very handy, especially as we'll see in the later portion of the game. It does work out perfectly, because he was kind of the last pig that I needed to get a poison in on. But Zarin is going to remove the poison. I'm surprised, though, that there wasn't a second collection. Maybe he was just a little bit cautious of where the mines were. That's completely fair enough. But thankful, I guess, for him that he was able to collect one of them at least, because the center is can be quite easy to jump over. It's quite easy to skip, but I think that was maybe a misinput as well on the scout's behalf. So seeing as I know that that runway area is clear, I can go ahead and collect the other health crate, and then I'm actually going to switch the roamer's role to the artillery destroyer. So his primary directive now is not to go for anybody. He is to just focus down the artillery once and for all. And as you can tell from my tenacity here, I'm just like, screw this. This artillery is going down in this turn. I am determined to destroy the goddamn thing. With 3 seconds remaining, I have to get it on target. So this time, left side, and I think I do damage myself a little bit, or I just get a little bit of shock. I don't know. I didn't see any damage from the from the pig, but if they are close enough, they will be affected by knockback ever so slightly. So yeah, finally, after 3 turns, destroying the artillery and removing Zarin from the armor. Meanwhile, his own gunner is still dealing damage onto mine, but if I'm honest, even if the artillery goes down to like 20 health or less, I would advise to remain in it as much as you possibly can. Because even if you are hit and the artillery is destroyed, you can sometimes only take 20 damage from that initial explosion. Of course, that's not counting any additional shells that fall in and damage you as well. That is still very much possible. But if you are able to remain inside your vehicle while you are on low HP, or at least low armor of that vehicle, I would advise staying in there, because it still requires your opponent to deal damage onto the vehicle in order to get you out of it. So unless they have a jetpack, unless you know that they have a secondary item, either a mine or a jetpack, in order to destroy said vehicle, then I would think more cautiously about it. But if they don't have those options available, then stay in the vehicle and make them destroy it. Even if you don't have any weapons, sometimes defensively it can be a fairly strong outcome. But fair play to Zarin, you know, the shots he has hit, he has been very effective with his bazookas, he has been very much on target with his mortars, and generally, I would say, throughout this match, when it comes to the heavier weapons, he has been significantly more accurate than me throughout the gameplay. So obviously, with thinking about the health pools in mind, if you have been keeping track, the gunner is down to 27 HP, which means that he is going to be very vulnerable to that of poison. So with that in mind, I move my scout closer, go for the hide, which I don't normally go for, but it was actually a YouTube comment that I read recently that mentioned that just distance is a massive, massive advantage. And as I touched on at the start of this video, if you're the first person to attack, and this is something that we've covered many times before in the league, just that if you are the first person to make the crossing from A to B, to put yourself in the line of fire, then you do get the short-term, not victory, but the short-term advantage, but then you put yourself at the disadvantage of, you know, being the big target for everyone on the opposite team, especially if you are just surrounded by all enemies. And again, big mistakes. Only 17 damage. Just everything was off in this game for me. It was really, really not good. Not happy with any of my sappers' turns. Other than the TNT kill earlier, they have been incredibly poor. And I'm actually finding in pro games, a lot of the time these days for me, obviously I will prioritize shrapnel when damaging vehicles. But more and more when it comes to pig versus pig, I will usually use up all my TNTs and then switch to the shrapnel. And only then switch to the shrapnel, because I find that the gamble, that 20 HP gamble, is slightly too much for me. I don't know, we'll get back to that in a minute, because obviously the next routine move here is to get the head jumps on the gunner and then jump back in, but I forgot how chunky and fat the artillery is, so slight mistake, little shake of the artillery there, because I knew that I did wrong, but at least I have a secondary target, because the poison shell doesn't really go that far, but thankfully the enemy scout was there for me to deal the poison there. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying about the sappers, it was actually after the last quarterfinal last season where I lost that final round, that round 5 against ADB, where if I had dealt an extra 20 damage, I would have won that game, but I opted for a mortar, which I missed, and out of a possible 50, I only dealt 25 damage. But if I'd have dealt the extra, I don't know, it plays on my mind a lot, but it kind of factors into that idea of I'm just going to play it safe most of the time, go with those TNTs, and if there's a minefield there too, then that's kind of an added bonus. But that's my mindset. That doesn't have to be yours, because obviously, you know, those big shrapnel hits can pay off, and that doesn't mean that I'm not going to ignore the shrapnels. I'm not going to ignore that extra damage that could be dealt onto a pig, but in very, very specific circumstances is probably when I will go ahead and use that. But I also know at this point in time that the scout is on such an amount of health that he will skip, because it was 61 minus 15 plus the 40, so he is now in skippable range. Meanwhile, the enemy paratrooper and sapper are busy dealing with my own sapper, who got himself into a bit of a pickle, but I do have the body block going on. Sadly though, the rifle burst is a good choice here, and he is going to take the full 45 to the face. But I think the biggest piece of advice I can give for those of you that are of a more attacking mindset, if you don't want to take the defensive foothold and you want to push on with your pigs, you need to combine damage with body blocks as much as you possibly can. If you are putting your pig in a space that is surrounded by enemies, you need to stand near the pig that is going to take their turn that is like the furthest away. So if they are like 5th in the order and you know that you've got a few turns to stand near them, then you're basically saying to your opponent, hey, like, I'm stood near you, I have closed this gap, but in doing so, I am now stood near your own pig. So you can damage me, but you will also damage yourself in the process. And if you've already dealt damage onto any pig in that area, then it is once again an advantage for you. That's not really my take. I much prefer, as I said at the start of this video, to be a lot more defensive, hence why my medic is finally out of the artillery, as the artillery is destroyed, and we are going to finish up this gunner with those head jumps, which I can also advise to practice as much as you can, because if you can get 5 head jumps in roughly 15 seconds, then that's pretty good. You saw earlier that I was trying to also push my own scout to go and get some head jumps in to try and help out the medic, but I opted out for it in the end because it wasn't needed. And we see 19, basically 20 minutes into this video, the first tranquilizer from my own medic. And this is where things start to fall apart for Zarin, because I get the one skip, the sapper is also another skip, the paratrooper will eventually become another skip, and air bursts, man. Air bursts are where it at. Bearing in mind that that sapper is on 80 HP, he is going to be dropped down to 20, and you can kind of gauge what is going to happen next. So all in all, ultra defensive medic pays off, but only on the maps where it is viable. If there are vehicles, if there are strong defensive positions, then taking the med early and gaining that extra armor is a massive, massive plus. And it is certainly something that I will be taking into league matches, because when we look at other maps like Barnyard Blitz, like Field Hospital, those could be vital. You never know. You never know what will happen in these games, because there are just so many factors involved, and that's what I love most about this game. It can feel very one-sided at a certain point in the game, and then that can just be flipped on its head because of several mistakes, or because of a certain class of pig that has been sat chilling in a corner for the last like 25 turns, and suddenly he jumps out and does things, you know. And of course, you know, tranquilizers are always going to be a massive part of that as well, which is where the med is extremely powerful, as we've mentioned many times before. But that is basically going to wrap things up here, because with the paratrooper tranquilized and the sapper finally losing his turn, I forgot that I still have a single poison gas, so you can put 2 and 2 together as to how this ends. But once again, big shout out to Zarin. He has been just a great player in the league, and of course in this scrim. We will be scrimming many more times in future, as will the exhibition matches becoming before the season starts. I do intend to get those in before we begin Season 5. Can you believe that we are that far ahead already into Season 5? Crazy times. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys later for the next one.
Talking, switching up and seeing how the shit would never stop. Motherfucker, enemy, damn.
This destination